The morning of my sister Katherine's wedding dawned bright and clear over the Newport mansion she'd chosen for her perfect day. I pulled up to the estate in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, only to find the circular driveway packed with luxury vehicles. "Oh, Rachel, darling," Mom called from the entrance, already perfectly coiffed in her mother-of-the-bride outfit. "You'll have to park on the street. We need the driveway for the important guests." I suppressed a smile, thinking of the classified documents in my briefcase. Of course, Mom wouldn't want to embarrass Katherine with my government worker car. "Still with that minor State Department job?" she sighed, checking her reflection in a window. "Your sister's marrying a neurosurgeon, you know. And all her bridesmaids are doctors or lawyers." I parked my Civic between two towering oak trees, well out of sight of the wedding photos. For the past 3 years, my family had assumed I was a low-level bureaucrat, pushing papers at the State Department. I'd never corrected them. Inside the mansion, controlled chaos reigned. Katherine, resplendent in designer white, was directing her army of bridesmaids like a general marshalling troops. "Rachel, you're late." She thrust a clipboard at me. "I need you to check on the catering. Since you're not in the wedding party, you can at least make yourself useful." Right. Because my navy pantsuit from Brooks Brothers wasn't elegant enough for her wedding photos. If only she knew this same suit had been in meetings at the UN Security Council last week. "Of course, Kathy," I said mildly, accepting the clipboard. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably another update about the emerging situation in Eastern Europe. But I ignored it. For now. Mom appeared, frowning at my simple pearl earrings. "Couldn't you have made more of an effort? The Abbotts will be here. You know Charles Abbott? The senator." I did know Senator Abbott. I'd briefed him on foreign policy just yesterday. But today I just nodded and headed toward the kitchen. The catering staff was efficiently preparing elaborate appetizers when my secure phone, the one my family didn't know about, vibrated with a specific pattern. 3 short, 2 long. The signal for immediate diplomatic intervention needed. "Excuse me," I said to the head chef, stepping into a quiet corner. "Secure line Alpha." "Madam Secretary," my chief of staff's voice was tense. "We have a situation. The UN Security Council is convening an emergency session. The ambassadors are en route to you now." I checked my watch. 2 hours until the ceremony. "How many?" 5. "Plus diplomatic security. 20 minutes." I glanced out the window at the growing crowd of wedding guests, all dressed in their finest. "Tell them to minimize visibility. This is my sister's wedding." "Yes, ma'am. But they're bringing the motorcade." I closed my eyes briefly. So much for staying inconspicuous. "Understood. I'll be ready." Returning to the main hall, I found my mother directing the flower arrangements. "Mom, just so you know, I may have some colleagues arriving shortly." "From your little office job?" She barely looked up. "Tell them this is a private event." Before I could respond, Katherine swooped in. "Rachel, why aren't these appetizers arranged yet? Honestly, you had one job." My secure phone buzzed again. A text this time: "Diplomatic convoy approaching. Ambassadors from UK, France, Germany on board." I straightened my jacket and checked my appearance in a nearby mirror. Time to switch from overlooked little sister to Secretary of State. Through the mansion's grand windows, I watched the motorcade approach. 6 black SUVs with diplomatic flags, flanked by motorcycle escorts. The wedding guests began turning from their champagne flutes, murmuring in confusion. "What on earth?" Mom stepped onto the front portico. Who would dare interrupt Katherine's wedding with such a spectacle? Katherine stormed over, her white dress rustling. "Rachel, did your government office friends do this? I swear if they ruin my perfect day." The lead vehicle stopped and 2 Secret Service agents emerged, scanning the area. Then the second SUV's door opened and Sir James Whitworth, the British ambassador, stepped out in full diplomatic attire. "Madam Secretary," he called, spotting me through the doorway. "My deepest apologies for the interruption, but we need you at the UN immediately. The situation has escalated." The wedding photographer's camera slipped from his hands, clattering on the marble floor. Mom's face went pale. "Secretary." More car doors opened. Ambassador Chen from China, Ambassador Dubois from France, all in formal diplomatic dress. Their security details created a protective perimeter as they approached the mansion. "Ma'am," my chief of staff emerged from another vehicle, carrying my diplomatic portfolio. "We have secure communications set up in the motorcade. The president is waiting for your assessment." Catherine's clipboard fell to the floor. The president?" I turned to my family, who stood frozen in shock. "I apologize for the disruption. It seems my little government job requires my immediate attention." You're the Secretary of State?" Mom whispered. "For the past 3 years," I confirmed, accepting the diplomatic portfolio from my chief of staff. "Those boring office meetings I couldn't miss? Usually international crisis negotiations. That work trip last month? G7 summit in Geneva." Ambassador Dubois approached urgently. "Madam Secretary, we need your decision on the Security Council resolution. The vote cannot proceed without U.S. approval." "Give me 2 minutes, Jean-Pierre," I said, then turned back to my stunned sister. "Katherine, I'm sorry, but I have to go. International security situations don't wait for wedding schedules." But, she stammered, "you're supposed to help with the catering." "I think the UN Security Council takes precedence over appetizer arrangements," I smiled gently. "Though I'm sure they're lovely." Mom found her voice. "All this time, when we thought you were just a minor bureaucrat?" "Yes." I straightened my plain navy suit, which actually cost more than Catherine's wedding dress, being custom-made for diplomatic functions. "It was easier to let you think that than explain why I kept missing family dinners to negotiate peace treaties. The Secret Service agents were getting restless. Madam Secretary, we need to move." I gave my family one last look. "Congratulations, Katherine. I'll make it up to you. Perhaps a private tour of the White House." As I walked toward the motorcade, I heard the wedding guests whispering, watching the overlooked sister transform into one of the most powerful diplomats in the world. Ambassador Chen fell into step beside me, already briefing me on the crisis at hand. "Oh, and Mom," I called over my shoulder. "About my old car being in the way? Don't worry. The diplomatic motorcade has plenty of space in the driveway." The last thing I saw as the motorcade pulled away was my family's faces in the mansion doorway, finally seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time in 3 years. Sometimes the best power is the kind you keep quiet. And sometimes the most satisfying moment isn't when you get the big job. It's when those who dismissed you realize exactly who you've become. My secure phone buzzed again. "POTUS waiting for your call." The motorcade sped through Newport's narrow streets, a far cry from the quiet drive in my Honda Civic just hours earlier. Inside the LED SUV transformed into a mobile command center, I was already deep in crisis management. "The Security Council is assembling," Ambassador Whitworth explained, passing me classified documents. "We need your position on the resolution within the hour." My secure tablet lit up with a video call from the White House. "Madam Secretary," the president's voice filled the vehicle. "I assume your sister's wedding was interrupted?" "Just slightly, sir," I replied, scanning the briefing materials. "Though I think my family is more shocked by my actual job title than the diplomatic interruption." He chuckled. 3 years of letting them think you were a minor bureaucrat? That must have been interesting." "Less interesting than this situation in Eastern Europe," I redirected, noting the latest intelligence reports. "Have you seen the satellite imagery from the border?" As we discussed global security matters, my phone buzzed with text messages from family members. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" "Katherine, OMG, the British ambassador is at my wedding." "Dad, just saw you on CNN. Called most influential Secretary of State in decades." "My daughter." I ignored them for now, focusing on the crisis at hand. The motorcade wound its way toward the secured airfield where my diplomatic jet waited. "Ma'am," my chief of staff interrupted, "your sister's wedding is trending on social media. Someone filmed the ambassador's arrival." I glanced at the viral video. There I was, transforming from wedding helper to global diplomat in seconds. The comments were flooding in. "Wait, isn't that the Secretary of State? Power move of the century." From parking in the street to diplomatic motorcade's smiling face with sunglasses. Ambassador Chen showed me his phone displaying Chinese social media. "You're trending in Beijing too. They're calling it Diplomatic Cinderella." "Wonderful," I muttered, returning to the security briefings. I'm sure that will make Thanksgiving interesting. My secure line rang again, the British Prime Minister this time. As I discussed international security strategies with world leaders, I couldn't help but remember all the condescending comments from family gatherings. Still pushing papers, Rachel? When are you going to get a real career? At least Katherine is doing something important with her life. The motorcade arrived at the airfield where my diplomatic jet stood ready. As we prepared to board, another wave of texts arrived. Katherine, the BBC is here interviewing wedding guests about you. Mom, Senator Abbott just told us about your nuclear disarmament treaty. Aunt Susan, why did you let us treat you like the family disappointment? Ambassador Du Bois touched my arm. Madam Secretary, Beijing is waiting for your call. I handed my phone to my assistant. Draft a response to my family. Something diplomatic. What should I say? I paused at the jet steps, thinking of all the family events where I'd been dismissed, overlooked, relegated to helper status. Tell them I'm sorry I had to leave the wedding early, and that next time they might want to save a better parking space for the Secretary of State's car. As the jet engines roared to life, I caught a glimpse of my sister's wedding venue in the distance. The media helicopters circling it suggested the quiet family wedding had become something quite different. Ready for the Security Council, ma'am? My chief of staff asked. I nodded, settling into the diplomatic suite on board. Let's go save the world. Again. The jet took off, leaving behind a family finally realizing that their underachieving daughter had become one of the most powerful women in the world. 2 days later, after successfully averting an international crisis and negotiating a landmark security agreement, I returned to Newport. The media frenzy had somewhat subsided, though photographers still lingered near my parents' house. I had my driver stop at my old parking spot on the street, where my Honda Civic still sat. Wait here, I told my security detail, approaching the car alone. Madam Secretary. A voice called out. Katherine stood on the mansion's steps, still in her honeymoon clothes. We postponed leaving for Paris. I hoped you'd come back. I turned, noting how differently she looked at me now. Gone was the commanding bride, replaced by someone who seemed almost nervous. Congratulations on the wedding, I said, pulling out my car keys. I hear it made international news, though perhaps not for the reasons you planned. She descended the steps, designer heels clicking. Why didn't you ever say anything? All those times we treated you like the family disappointment? I finished, smiling slightly. It was easier this way. No expectations, no pressure, just the freedom to do my job. But we were horrible to you. He gestured at my Civic. Made you park in the street, treated you like the help. While I was negotiating nuclear treaties and advising the president? I laughed softly. Katherine, do you really think where I parked my car mattered when I was managing global security? The mansion's doors opened again. Mom and Dad emerged, looking somewhat shell-shocked still. Rachel, Dad started, we saw your Security Council speech yesterday. On every major network. The one where you stared down the Russian ambassador? Mom added. In 3 languages? I leaned against my Honda, the same car they'd been so embarrassed by. 4 languages, actually. The Mandarin portion didn't make the news. We've been watching everything, Katherine said. Your G7 speeches, your UN addresses, your diplomatic missions. You've been changing the world while we were mocking your little government job. That was rather the point, I replied, checking my secure phone. The president's daily brief would be starting soon. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage of all. Mom stepped forward, tears in her eyes. But why let us treat you that way? You could have told us. And what would have changed? I asked gently. Would it have made me better at my job? Would it have helped me broker peace deals or navigate international crises? My security detail approached discreetly. Ma'am, the president is waiting for the morning briefing. I nodded, then turned back to my family. The truth is, I didn't need your approval. I didn't need the perfect parking spot or a place in the wedding photos. I had something better, the chance to make real change in the world. And we missed it all, Dad said quietly. Not all, I smiled, reaching into my briefcase. I brought you something. I handed them each a formal invitation. Their eyes widened as they read the gold-embossed text. Next month's state dinner, I explained. The president specifically asked about my family. Seems you've become quite famous in diplomatic circles. Katherine clutched her invitation. The White House. Consider it my wedding gift. Though you might want to pack more than one outfit. After dinner, we're flying to Paris on Air Force 2 for your rescheduled honeymoon. The French president insisted on hosting you personally. Their stunned expressions were priceless. Oh, and Mom, I added, walking toward my waiting motorcade. About my parking situation? Don't worry. I have reserved spots now at every government building in D.C. Right next to the president's. As I slid into my diplomatic vehicle, I caught one last glimpse of my family standing there, finally seeing the full scope of who their underachieving daughter had become. My secure phone buzzed. Another world crisis needing attention. But this time, as the motorcade pulled away, I knew something had fundamentally shifted. Not in my role as Secretary of State, but in something more personal. The overlooked sister had become the family's greatest achievement. And the best part? I'd done it all while they weren't even watching. Sometimes the quietest success speaks the loudest. And sometimes the best parking spot isn't in the driveway. It's in history. My chief of staff handed me the morning's briefings. Ready for another day of changing the world, Madam Secretary? I smiled, thinking of my Honda Civic in the street. Always. Though next time, let's try not to interrupt any weddings. The motorcade merged onto the highway, carrying me back to the global stage where I belonged. Behind me, a family was finally learning that true power doesn't need the best parking spot.